Nigeria has a huge infrastructure deficit which considerably limits efforts towards achieving inclusive growth, sustainable development and poverty reduction. With infrastructure stock estimated at 20 to 25% of gross domestic product, Nigeria's infrastructure stock is still significantly lower than the recommended international benchmark of 70% of GDP. This means that Nigeria will have to more than double its spending on infrastructure from the current 2 to 3% of GDP to around 7% to make appreciable progress in infrastructure development over the next 3 decades. In view of this, the Nigerian government has rapidly increased the use of infrastructure finance from additional sources, including multilateral development banks, bilateral creditors, and public-private partnerships, particularly since the return to civilian rule in 1999. Chief Executive Officer at the CFG Advisory, Tilewa Adebajo, will be speaking to us on alternatives in infrastructure financing in an emerging economy such as Nigeria. Good afternoon and welcome to Newsday.
Good afternoon.
Now, with Nigeria's rising debt profile, there's no doubt that this new administration must explore alternative financing options. I'd like to know what your thoughts on this are and what, alternatives you'd recommend.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Well, as you said from your introduction, the infrastructure deficit is quite significant in Nigeria today. And when we talk about infrastructure, I think we should also not forget social infrastructure, such as health and education, which is hospitals and schools. The issues in Nigeria are quite clear now, in the sense that government is currently using 95% of its revenues to service debt. And the options you mentioned on the debts are no longer available, at least for government. So it's important that government has to look at the private sector to be able to finance its infrastructure deficit. And how do you do that? You do that by enhancing credibility into the system. Now, in terms of the enabling laws in the environment, we have the Infrastructure Concession and Regulatory Commission, the ICRC, which is set up in 2005 and has some very interesting laws. Over the last 11 years, they've done about $9 billion worth of transaction, which is a small amount compared to the size of what we need. So it's important that the ICRC is repositioned. We have what you call now InfraCrop. InfraCrop also needs to be repositioned. And also we have a sovereign wealth fund. Now, between the sovereign wealth fund, the NSIA, and InfraCrop, they should be able to co-invest with other international investors into infrastructure development in Nigeria, because as it is right now, government does not have funding to be able to put into infrastructure development. But government does have a significant amount of assets that they can concession. As you can see from the last airports concession round that just went through, some of the rail infrastructure and some of the port infrastructure. We've made significant progress on this, but there needs to be more.
With the NSIA, the ICRC, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund that you mentioned for alternative financing, what are the challenges that would be that they would be facing in the upcoming months, especially with the new administration?
Well, the challenges they've been facing haven't really changed as much. The challenge they've been facing is the fact that funding, the dearth of funding, I think, has been one of the major problems they have. And what government needs to do right now is that those agencies need to help. We do not have the money now, and we cannot go borrowing. So we need to go to the international markets, and we need to attract foreign direct investments into infrastructure. Because FDI is a very, very big part of infrastructure funding. Unfortunately, Nigeria hasn't done well in the areas of FDIs. At a point in time, our FDI numbers were between 6 billion to 8 billion. We've done 8 billion twice in a year. Our FDIs went to below 1 billion in the last 6 years, and it's currently recovering at about 3 billion. Now, this is not the sort of money you're going to look at for infrastructure financing. So what I think is important that the NSIA and the new InfraCorp, which was pioneered by the central bank, they need to be able to co-invest with other international investors into projects in Nigeria. But the key problem now is that the ICRC and the way infrastructure projects are done right now it's too cumbersome. You have a situation whereby you have to have a draft outline business case, and then before you submit your final business case, and the process drags. And most of all these infrastructure assets are within the ministries. So I think the president, what you said about the new president doing is that they need to go into the ministries. And we've done that before. About a while back, we were able to identify about 25 projects that were bankable, worth about 20 trillion naira that we felt the government should let go of. So what the new government needs to do now is to go into all the ministries, the MDAs, identify their viable and bankable assets, extract them from there, because the problem has been the issue of project development. So when you extract all these assets, you need to get the financial expert to do the valuations of these infrastructure projects. And then what you need to do is to prepare them for the investors and create the proper process, do the proper advertising, create the transparency that will bring a lot of the foreign investors. There's been an attempt currently at trying to toll some of the roads. That has been a slow process. It lacks a lot of transparency, and a lot of the foreign investors will not come. So the president has powers within the ICRC Act to actually prioritize certain projects, bring them out of there, and give them special resolution that can help attract foreign investors. That's what you need to do. You need to prepare these assets, and we need to move away from this sort of unsolicited bids or unsolicited approach that we're using towards infrastructure release from the ministries, because the government is holding a lot of significant assets that they can no longer manage, that they need to go out and concession.
Now, some analysts have suggested, expanding the tax net, as a way of boosting revenue. But I'm wondering what the dangers of doing so will. What effect will it have on local businesses, especially with the removal of oil subsidy and, of course, the associated high cost of production? Would you advise expanding, the tax net?
Can you please repeat that question? You talked about the tax net.
Yes, I said some analysts, have suggested expanding the tax net, as a way of boosting revenue. But I'm wondering what the dangers are to local businesses, especially with the removal of oil subsidy and the associated high cost of production.
Well, let's separate the issues. Widening the tax net and removal of subsidies are two different issues. In order for you to widen your tax net, you need to grow your economy. The more your economy grows, the more people you can bring under the tax net. And we also have to understand that Nigeria is a dual economy, and 50% of our economy is in the informal sector. And the informal sector contributes 50% of the GDP of this country. And this is a sector that we have not been able to effectively tax. So it's important that government should devise strategies, retail taxation strategies, to reach most of these informal sector operators, and that will only happen with financial inclusion. So in terms of the subsidy removals, I think that is a totally different issue, because that brings in about $10 to $15 billion a year into government, and that is something that government could use to balance its books and clean up its balance sheet, which is probably in a very bad shape at the moment.
I'm not not sure if this is also along the same lines, but I'll ask it anyways. With the printing of new money, would printing new money, would this alleviate some of the pressure or help with some of this infrastructure financing, especially as we know that the December 31st deadline is for the swap for the old notes? Would this affect anything?
Well, again, two different issues. When you take a look at the infrastructure financing is long-term financing. And this is money that comes in and stays in there for like 5, 10, sometimes 10, 15 years. Most concessions, especially railway concessions, can go up for 20, 25 years. So these are not projects for the faint-hearted. And infrastructure investors need the confidence. If they don't have the confidence in your economy, in your policies, in your government, they're not going to come through. The issue with printing money or the new monies are more of monetary policy issues affecting inflation and how we're going to manage our currency swap. As you said, the printing of the money, the currency withdrawal impacted more of the informal sector than the formal sector of the economy, because most of the formal sector of the economy could use alternative payment solutions. But for the informal sector, by the time you're taking out 3.5 trillion naira from them, it becomes quite significant. So the issues for this government is that within the next 6 months, the government will have to rely more on the ways and means financing until they're able to come up with their budgets, because government is a continuum. Salaries need to be paid. So when this government is able to put together their medium-term economic framework and prepare their budgets, then they're in a better position to be able to come up with something more concrete in terms of printing of the money and a lot of all those other things. But I think in terms of the dual notes and everything, I think, that is more or less something that has been resolved. And instead of having about 3.6 trillion naira of cash in circulation now, we only have about 1.6 trillion. So there's a significant reduction in the number of cash in circulation. And you can see the effect on the economy, on the growth in the first quarter. That has reduced growth. So we need to reflate the economy and go back to the path of growth by putting in more cash into the informal sector.
Well, and what about the issue of foreign direct investment? How can we boost that under this new administration? I know the president in his inaugural speech talked about reviewing multiple taxation for foreign businesses, but is this enough to boost foreign investment into our economy?
Well, foreign direct investment is about confidence. Like I told you before, as far back as about 10 years ago, we had about $8.8 billion worth of foreign direct investment. It went down to less than 1 billion, and today we're at about 3. If we had continued along that path of growth, our FDIs now should be in the region of $12 to $15 billion a year. So, and why did it go down? Foreign direct investment, it's about confidence. Our policies over the last 8 years were not very friendly, investor friendly. We saw close to about a 400% devaluation of our currency. We went towards stagflation. We had a very high debt profile, high inflation. So this sort of environment does not create the right environment for a foreign investor to come in to invest. And to make matters worse, there was scarcity of foreign exchange. And, a lot of all these things could not really work. So in order for you to create a conducive environment for foreign direct investments, first of all, we need to change the narrative abroad. The credit rating on our debt instruments now are at junk bond status. And we need to change that very quickly and move out to investment grade. So a lot of all these policies of the merging of the exchange rates, removal of the subsidies, and all the other structural reforms that we need to carry out, if we carry them out and we put our economy on the path of growth and recovery, we can now, first of all, at least go from the $2-3 billion a year we have in FDIs back to the high of 8.8 billion and try to exceed that. So foreign direct investment is correlated with confidence. In terms of the laws in this country today, Nigeria has one of the best foreign direct investment laws and incentives in our books. There's no doubt about that. But when you have airlines who have about close to over $900 million trapped in remittances that they can't get out, it doesn't send the right signal, because investors think that if they put their money in, they're not going to be able to get it out. So we need to sort out our foreign exchange regime, and we need to give confidence to foreign direct investors. I'll tell you, there's a company called the Global Infrastructure Partners. It has between 60 to $75 billion worth of assets under management that is managed by a Nigerian, Mr. Bayo Ogunlesi. People know him for owning Gatwick Airport, but he owns more than that. He owns Edinburgh Airport, he owns concessions, including a lot of LNG projects. So, but these people do not have their radar on Nigeria because of exactly what we're doing. We're not really boosting confidence in a lot of what we should be doing.
And still on that line about confidence, that other C word, corruption, with what kind of role does that play? What danger does it pose to all these alternatives that you've been discussing if it's not quelled, this menace that is ravaging most of our institutions?
Well, like you said, corruption and transparency are two. It will deter foreign investments without a doubt, because if you want to concession your assets and if you want to attract foreign direct investments, they're looking for transparency, they're looking for accountability, and they're looking for nobody asking them for a percentage of the take. That is not their model. And at the end of the day, these are the things that we need to work with to be able to understand how we can make things work and how things can actually go. So corruption, has a negative impact on foreign direct investments, without a doubt.
Okay, so my final question, I'm wondering how we can properly implement public-private partnership in Nigeria. What are some of the challenges, that we've had in implementing this? And is there any way we can work around those challenges under this new administration?
Like I've told you, the way you can look at PPPs is the laws are there. The problem is that we have a problem with origination of transactions. So like I've said earlier, what the new administration needs to do is that the president has powers under the ICRC Act. So he needs to use those powers to be able to extract bankable products from all the MDAs. When you get out all those bankable products under the MDAs, you need to put it under some sort of supervision of the presidency, whereby you do the project development. You do the assessment of the projects, you bring in the experts, they review the projects, they do the valuations, and you create a data room. And once you do that, there's transparency and accountability. Then you now go through the ICRC and advertise on an international basis those projects. And then you can now encourage people like the NSIA and InfraCorp to be able to co-invest with other foreign investors that will be coming in to respond to these articles. And even local investors also, let's forget that, because we still have some capacity locally. So both local investors and foreign investors are looking for transparency. So if we can put transparency, accountability, remove corruption from the process of origination of all these infrastructure assets and put it in a structured format, I think that we could easily raise, within the next 2 to 3 years, we could raise close to $100 billion worth of funding for infrastructure projects in Nigeria.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. Tilewa Adebajo, the Chief Executive Officer of CFG Advisory.